Hi again, everyone. Gary Digital Williams here on Boxing Along the Beltway, our news and notes for this week. And had some interesting news and notes. Not a whole lot of news this week. We're going to recap one of the events for two of our Beltway boxers. We're going to talk about a story that's still in the news somewhat as we approach the second anniversary of the tragic situation. And so we're going to thank some people and talk about that story. And then we're going to honor three people who have left us this week. One was a local boxing legend. One was an international boxing legend. And one wasn't even a boxing legend at all. He was a professional wrestling genius. And we're going to honor him as well on this podcast this week. Box on Beltway Boxing News and Notes are brought to you by Real-Time Pain Relief. From boxers to ballerinas, for shoulder pain to muscle strain and everything between, Boxing Along the Beltway recommends Real-Time Pain Relief, the natural, plant-based, safe, fast, and effective ointment. If you go to freepainoffer.com, you buy $10 worth of Real-Time Pain Relief, you get a free $10 tube of Real-Time Pain Relief. Rub it on, the pain is gone in real time. Well, the Russell brothers, both from Capitol Heights, Maryland, they scored knockout victories on a card. It was a King's Promotions card at the Sands Bethlehem Event Center in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. That was on Tuesday, September 19th. Antonio Russell, he scored a third-round knockout over Christian Renteria of Tijuana, Mexico. Time to KO was 136 of the third round. Antonio now 9-0, 7 KOs. Renteria falls to 7-6, 6 KOs. So Antonio looks to have like a stranglehold on the Prospect of the Year award in 2017. Of course, we still have a few months left, but he's won twice already this year. He fought outstanding at the MGM National Harbor back in May of this year. And looks like he may be in good shape here. 9-0, 7 KOs. Renteria is 7-6, 6 KOs. Meanwhile, younger brother Antoine Russell, he scored his second straight first-round TKO. He stopped Jesus Lule of Fort Myers, Florida. That was at 2:38 of the first round. He landed some good shots on him as well. Getting back to Antonio's knockout, that knockout came right in the third round as he blistered Renteria with a third round knockout, with a third right-hand shot that dropped him in the third round and won the bout for him. But Antoine just dominated Jesus Lule from the get-go, stopping him at 2:38 of the first round. Antoine now 2-0, 2 KOs, and Lule is 11-24-1, 2 KOs. So that's the results for this week. Michael Fox and Juan Rodriguez are in bouts on September 29th. I believe Joshua Dynamite Davis is on a card in Louisville, Kentucky on September 28th. So we'll give you a little bit more detail. We gave you some details about that last week, but we hope to give you more as we go closer to those two games. And of course, those two matchups. Our next broadcast will be on Saturday, October 14th. We come to you live from the ABC Sports Complex in Springfield, Virginia for the Victory Boxing Promotions card. So we'll hope to give you a detailed update on that one in a couple of weeks or so. All right, so that's the updated news for today. Now, some things I want to talk about this week. One of them, and I got to credit a guy named Mark Londo, who this time, along with his partner Mohammed El Mahmoud, continues to put the Prichard Cologne situation and keep it in the limelight. We're coming up on the 2-year anniversary of truly one of the more tragic things I can remember in the Beltway over my many years of doing this. Back on October 17th at the Eagle Bank Arena in Fairfax, Virginia, October 17, 2015. That was the match between Prichard Cologne and Terrell Williams, where Prichard Cologne was hurt to the point where he is now basically in a wheelchair. He is nowhere near what he once was. Just celebrated a birthday recently, by the way. And it brought to mind, and actually these two things that brought two things to mind. Of course, this continues to be in the limelight. That's number one. And the fact that neither Joseph Cooper, the referee, or Dr. Richard Ashby have worked anywhere pretty much since that incident. But also this week, this was late last week, the city of New York settled with settled for $22 million with a boxer by the name of Magomed Abdusalamov. And it's supposed to be the largest personal injury settlement that New York has ever made. Now, this is what happened when Abdusalamov, who was a well-known heavyweight at the time, got beaten by opponent Mike Perez. He was beaten prone. And Abdusalamov was permanently brain damaged and paralyzed on the right side. And the Inspector General of New York, according to the article here by Londo and El Mahmoud, found what they called widespread incompetence by the New York State Athletic Commission. So they finally settled with him for $22 million. And this brought to mind what took place back in October of 2015 at the Eagle Bank Arena. Now, again, my feelings on this situation, I thought Joe Cooper lost control of the bout. I don't think there's any question about that. He lost it in the lights, so to speak. The bright lights got to him a little bit. According to the article, I want to quote from this article here. They say, Londo and El Mahmoud say, quote, if just one of those actors in this drama would have been capable at their job, Prichard Cologne would be healthy today. Their inaction put Cologne in grave danger, and unfortunately, in the aftermath of Cologne's vegetative state, mainstream coverage was focused more on his prognosis than on the defective mechanism that surrounded him that fateful day. And they say that the New York, that's a quote, and the New York settlement basically puts it back in the hands of how badly the New York State Athletic Commission used in that time. The article also quoted me in a 2010 article back in June of 2010. I actually found this on my blog because as far back as 2010, there have been calls for the removal of David Holland. Okay, there have been calls for him off and on for quite some time, actually. And I spoke to a representative from the Department of Professional and Occupational Regulation, Virginia State Commission, and I said, quote, he's not going anywhere. This is what the regulation department replied to me. He's not going anywhere. There are a couple people who would like to see Holland go. He has difficulties with promoters in the past, but there are no plans to replace him. That's a quote, and I stand by the quote. That quote is accurate, and I found it on the blog back in June of 2010. Difficulty with promoters, that's very true. And when you look at Virginia being still the last state, if they have it all to put a moratorium on these boxes from Wilson, North Carolina, quite frankly, you got to wonder, what is going on over there? And, you wonder if it's going to wait until somebody from Wilson gets permanently injured, much like Prichard Cologne did, in a bad situation where no cameras all around. There's only me and Juan Marshall as the media, Ron Harris maybe as the media. Okay. There was another article that came out in 2010, an article in a website called the Mason Conservative. It was called "Is There a Problem?" at the Virginia DPOR. A journalist named Chris Beer reviewed his stop through Holland and said, maybe because Virginia is smaller, but I don't want to be our state to be the first death in MMA at that time, or something very serious happens in a boxing or pro wrestling match. So, like I said, this is something that's been happening for a while. And like I said, I have a great relationship with David Holland. I enjoy working with him, in all honesty, but there are a lot of situations in between here that tell me that something has to be wrong. Okay. And so it is as we go into Virginia next month. We look at the matches so far are pretty decent. And it is interesting to see what will happen down the road here, because a lot of folks want Holland to leave. There seems to be no intention of him leaving, and how things will work out, we do not know. Okay, and I know there are problems. There are problems, and I admit there are problems. Whether or not they're going to work through them, we don't know. That's where that is right now. So again, kudos to Mark Londo, especially for keeping this story in the public eye. And again, we're coming up on 2 years now. Again, a very sad situation. Terrell Williams hasn't fought since that bout either. I mean, it messed him up completely. And so there were no winners in that situation. So that will include that. Again, we hope things will turn out for the better. Now, we have 3 passings that have taken place in this week that we have to over the last couple weeks that have taken place that we are going to talk about this time. The first one is a local one, and it is very sad to know, even though this man had a long and full life. His name was Benjamin Benny Alperstein. Benny Alperstein, he passed away on September 16th. That was this past Saturday at the age of 102. Now, many people know Benny Alperstein for his furniture store that he's had for a long period of time. His family has owned for a while. But we in the boxing community know him because not only was he a longtime member of the Maryland State Athletic Commission up until 2016, really. I mean, really, technically, he really was there up until his passing, but he would go to meetings up until 2016. But he was also a great collegiate boxer at the University of Maryland. He lived in Cherry Chase, Maryland. He served as commissioner in the state for more than 30 years. And again, was still attending cards and meetings up until 2016. Now, what a lot of people may not know was that in the 60s, from 1965 to 1970, he was a commissioner and later the chair of the D.C. Boxing Commission. A lot of people may not know that. He was chair of the D.C. Boxing Commission at one time. But in his youth, he was an outstanding boxer. He was a 2-time national collegiate boxing champion at the University of Maryland. He won the title in 1937, 1938. He was named the outstanding boxer in 1938. And actually, this is a little known fact. Benny Alperstein won the first national championship of any kind in any sport at the University of Maryland. A lot of people don't know that. He's a member of I think he's a member of more than these, but I know for a fact he's a member of the University of Maryland, the D.C., and the Maryland Boxing Hall of Fames. I think he may be a member of a few others too, but definitely those halls of fame. So he was an outstanding person. I didn't know him all that well. I met him on a couple of occasions, but didn't know him all that well. But I definitely knew the name, definitely knew the legacy. No question about that. So send this to his longtime wife, and we have condolences to the whole family. The funeral was held this past Tuesday in Olney, Maryland. But condolences to Benjamin Benny Alperstein, a well-known name in the Beltway boxing community. Now, internationally, of course, this took place on September 19th. We lost the man known as the Raging Bull, really known as the Bronx Bull. But he hung on to that Raging Bull moniker, and that's, of course, Jake LaMotta. Now, Jake LaMotta was one of the more colorful characters in the history of boxing. He passed away on September 19th, at the age of 95. He had a record of 83, 19, and 4, just 30 KOs, but he was a tough, no-nonsense boxer. Now, many people remember him for his 6-fight series with Sugar Ray Robinson. And of course, he had one of the great lines in boxing when he said, "I fought Sugar Ray so much I have diabetes." He won the first time. No, I'm sorry. He won the second time. Robinson beat him the first time in New York City back on October 2nd, 1942 by a 10-round unanimous decision. But then LaMotta would come back on February the 5th in Detroit, Michigan, and win a 10-round unanimous decision. That was Sugar Ray Robinson's very first professional loss. They would fight again just 21 days later on February 26, 1943 in Detroit, Olympia Stadium, and then Robinson would win that bout by 10-round unanimous decision. Now, LaMotta would go on to win the World Championship, Middleweight Championship in 1949. He beat Marcel Cerdan in the 10th round TKO, and Cerdan got hurt and finally had to retire in the 10th round, and he was on his way back to sign for the rematch against LaMotta, but unfortunately Cerdan died in a plane crash on his way back. LaMotta would defend the title, and then he would face Sugar Ray Robinson again for the 4th time back on February 14th, 1951, Valentine's Day, 1951, and Robinson battered LaMotta from pillar to post, but LaMotta would never go down. He never went down in the bout. That bout was always known after that as the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. Again, he took a beating, but he never went down the whole time. So LaMotta would face Robinson 2 more times and lose to him 2 more times. Now, Jake LaMotta was not without issues. No question about that. He had part of the lure of his life, his career, was the fact that he was not a perfect person. He was not a on the always up and up person. Back in 1947, he was in a bout that people thought was fixed. He threw the bout, and eventually in 1960, he admitted to doing that. He admitted to throwing the actual fight because the mob was supposed to get a title fight for him if he had thrown that fight. Back in 1955, he opened a nightclub in Miami Beach, Florida. And then 2 years later, he was arrested and served 6 months in prison for promoting prostitution. A 14-year-old was arrested at the club and she said that she did her prostitution at LaMotta's nightclub. Then, of course, in 1970, LaMotta would write his autobiography. It's called Raging Bull, My Story. 10 years later, 1980, it was made into a movie. The legendary movie Raging Bull, starring Robert De Niro, nominated for 8 Academy Awards, and De Niro would win for Best Actor in that film. LaMotta trained De Niro for that fight and basically said that De Niro could have fought professionally after that training. They trained pretty much every day for almost a year, and they came together there. And we came together and really was great. Now, although LaMotta wasn't thrilled with the portrayal, he generally learned to accept it. But he wasn't totally thrilled with that performance. In 1986, Jake LaMotta was inducted into the World Boxing Hall of Fame. And then 4 years later, in 1990, he was inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame. The Ring magazine named him the 5th greatest middleweight of all time back in 2004. Now, actually, I had a chance to meet Jake LaMotta as he was a fixture at the Fight Night event, the Fight for Children event at the Washington Hilton in Washington, D.C. He came pretty much every year up until it was about 2014 or so. He got a belt for that because he was a Fight Night Hall of Famer, and he was always there, always at that event. Now, in 1995, I met him in 1995, and I made a cardinal error that day. I made a cardinal error. I did not call him the Raging Bull right away. I was going to do it eventually, but as I started the interview, I just said, this is Jake LaMotta, former middleweight champion, and he interrupted me and said, the Raging Bull, get your facts straight, So, that's got that off to a wrong start. I almost restarted this for Boxing Spotlight. I almost restarted the interview, but I went ahead and did it. And as it went on, it went fine. I didn't name him Raging Bull by the time we finished it up. But it did go well eventually, but it got off to a very rocky start. And, Jake LaMotta may be the last of the old style boxers that are still here. You look at what happened in 1995, that year, of Fight Night, we had the likes of Floyd Patterson, Ingemar Johansson, Kid Gavilan, Sandy Sadler, Gene Fulmer, Joe Frazier was there. I believe Ken Norton was there. Who else? Ingemar Johansson. Like I said, Floyd Patterson. All these legendary people. And of course, Muhammad Ali was there that year too. That's true. Muhammad Ali was there that year too. And all these legendary people are now no longer with us. I think LaMotta was the last to leave us. It's truly the end of an era in many ways. There'll never be another Jake LaMotta. No question about that. But now a true era has passed because all of those people are no longer with us. And, when I went to Fight Night 95, I was so thrilled because I met a lot of the people that my father used to like growing up when he grew up. I met Kid Gavilan. That was a thrill. I met Floyd Patterson. That was a thrill. I met Archie Moore. Archie Moore was there. I met him. There was some awesome folk at that particular event that year. And one by one, they've all gone. So, we have legends here. We have legends now, but just that era of legends is something, it'll be unlike anything we'll ever see again. No question about that. So, condolences once again to the legendary Raging Bull, Jake LaMotta. Now, this final one, again, has nothing to do with boxing. This has something to do with my other passion, which is professional wrestling. And we lost a man that I consider, and that many, many other people consider to be the greatest professional wrestling manager in the history of the business. This week we lost Bobby the Brain Heenan. Bobby Heenan's career really looked at really three ways. He was a wrestler at one time. He didn't do a lot of wrestling, but he was a wrestler at one time and knew how to take bumps and do things wrestlers would do, which enabled him as a manager to be very successful. Okay. Once he became a manager, that's what he really wanted to do in the business. There was no stopping him. Bobby Heenan was a manager in the American Wrestling Association, the 808 territory, for many years. Also was in the WWA, the World Wrestling Association territory in Indianapolis. But we first heard the name Bobby the Brain Heenan when he managed Blackjack Lanza and Blackjack Mulligan, the Blackjacks, to victory. He will always be known for his legendary pairing with the late, great Nick Bockwinkel. In fact, I had a chance to interview Nick Bockwinkel back in 2011 at the NWA Wrestling Fan Fest in Atlanta, Georgia. And I talked to him about his career with Bobby Heenan, and he just praised him to the high heavens, the greatest manager of all time. They worked so well together. Now, Bockwinkel could give great promos. He gave very intelligent promos. But Bobby Heenan, as his manager, gave him that little edge that made Bockwinkel one of the greats of all time. When Bobby Heenan finally came to the WWE, WWF, he managed the who's who. In fact, when I wrote my tribute to him on Facebook, I had forgotten some of the people he had managed. I had forgotten he managed at a couple of occasions Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff, who was a Hall of Famer. I had forgotten that, to tell you the truth. In fact, Orndorff famously fired Heenan twice during the course of that time. And of course, he also managed the King Harley Race, which I had forgotten, another Hall of Famer. I had forgotten he managed him. and did very good business with them. And of course, they were established stars prior to. I mean, Harley Race was a 8-time world champion, but I think he did probably maybe his best work with Bobby Heenan. Really did. It's amazing. And of course, he also managed the likes of Ravishing Rick Rude. He managed him to the Intercontinental title. He managed Hercules. He managed Hercules Hernandez. He managed the Brainbusters, Art Anderson, Tully Blanchard. Got them the World Tag Team title. And then, of course, he managed legendary Andre the Giant in what was Andre's final major role as a wrestler. Bobby Heenan was his manager. They went all the way to WrestleMania 3 with the major event with Hulk Hogan in front of 93,000 plus at Pontiac Silverdome. He was that great of a manager. He was, one of the things he said, you listen to me, you go to the top. You don't listen to me, you never heard from again. That was one of his greatest quotes. He also managed, by the way, Mr. Perfect, Kurt Hennig. Managed him to the Intercontinental title as well. He was just an amazing manager. He had a great, he did tremendous promos. He was funny. He was everything. He was funny. He get you mad. He get you happy. He did so many great things as a manager. He was incredible. However, that may be overshadowed by his work as a commentator. Now, the WWE had a great commentator in Jesse the Body Ventura, who was great on the mic. He favored the heels primarily, and he was solid at what he did, no question about that. But Bobby Heenan took it to another level. And he was great with everybody he worked with, would be Vince McMahon, Jim Ross, sometimes Tony Schiavone. But when he and Gorilla Monsoon got together, it was phenomenal. It is probably the greatest pairing in the history of the business. I mean, Gorilla Monsoon by himself was not a great announcer. Literally rafters had, literally, people literally hanging from the rafters. No, that was just terrible. But he and Bobby Heenan were as funny as any comedy team you could ever put together. They loved each other, which was really, really. You watched them, you said they have to love each other to do the things they did together, But whether you watch Primetime or Wrestling Challenge, watching Gorilla Monsoon and Bobby Heenan work together was phenomenal. And Bobby Heenan was great with any announcer, really. There's a classic bit you watch on YouTube, Worldwide, when Bobby Heenan made the jump to WCW. And he did Worldwide with Tony Schiavone. And there's a scene where they're watching Hacksaw Jim Duggan. And Tony Schiavone refers to Hacksaw Duggan as intelligent. Well, Bobby Heenan just broke and he just cracked up laughing. All he does throughout the whole bout is laugh. And it is one of the funniest things you ever want to hear in your life. It's hilarious. It really is. It's hilarious. So that's a great bit. By the latter part of his life, Bobby Heenan had come down with throat cancer, stage 4 throat cancer. And in a sad bit of irony, much like Muhammad Ali, when he had his Parkinson's syndrome, it robbed Heenan of his ability to talk. And that was so sad. It really was. I mean, the guy who's one of the best talkers in the business could not talk anymore. That was just sad. Prior to that, however, in 2004, at the WWE Hall of Fame, Bobby Heenan was inducted there. He was just in the first stages of that cancer. And he gave, without question, the greatest Hall of Fame speech in the history of the WWE Hall of Fame. It is phenomenal. It is phenomenal. I suggest you watch it on WWE programming. You watch it on YouTube. It's totally off the cuff. It really doesn't have any real, well, it has some rhyme and reason. I will say that. But what he says in it is so incredibly funny. It is unlike anything you will ever hear. It is without question the greatest speech. I mean, he gets on people. He kids people. He tells incredible stories. And all while he says, I'm having fun. And again, he had just gone through the chemo when the cancer first hit. And he was just plain remarkable during that time frame. It was incredible. I saw him in 2011 at that same Atlanta Fan Fest. And again, by that time, the cancer had taken great hold. He was still signing autographs and talking to fellow wrestlers and talking to the fans. Well, you know, he was working with the fans anyway, seeing fellow wrestlers. But the voice was gone. And that was very, very sad. And to his credit, he lived really almost 14 years with the cancer. And still going out to fan fests on a pretty regular basis. And he was still mingling with the fans. That's what kept him going, from what his wife said. That's what kept him going. He is the greatest manager in the business. I mean, many other managers, and I grew up in a time where managers were pretty big. I grew up in the North, in DC, where we had the WWF, and we had the Three Wise Men of the East. We had Lou Albano, Classy Freddie Blassie, and the Grand Wizard of Wrestling. And Arnold Skolin would manage Bruno Sammartino and Bob Backlund. You know, you look at people like Gary Hart and Sir Oliver Humperdinck and James J. Dillon and Jim Cornette, Paul Heyman, Gary Hart. I think many of them, those who are still with us, I know Jim Cornette says it. I would guess Paul Heyman would say the same. That without question, probably J.J. Dillon would as well. That Bobby Heenan was above all of them. The guy who was known as either Downtown Bruno or Harvey Whippleman, depending on who you're talking to, he says it. He was just special. He really was. Bobby Heenan was a very special person. He was, whether he was a manager or a commentator, he was phenomenal. He did anything for the business. He knew how to take bumps, as I said, and a lot of that time that favored him well when he was in there against guys like the Red Rooster, Terry Taylor, when he's up against the Ultimate Warrior, when he's up against Greg Gagne, Jim Brunzell. That helped, and the fact that he was able to take bumps made everything he did look and sound believable. And that was the major thing. So we are truly going to miss Bobby the Brain Heenan in this business. He was, again, the greatest of his kind. No question about that. So our condolences to the Heenan family as well. Heenan family in the ring and outside the ring as well. So that will do it here for another edition of Beltway Boxing News and Notes. We will have a preview of the September 29th. We talked about that a little bit more on September 28th, 29th. Shows coming up, as well as the October 14th show from the ABC Sports Complex in Springfield, Virginia. We'll talk more about that in the next few episodes. Beltway Boxing News and Notes brought to you by Real Time Pain Relief. Go to freepainoffer.com. Buy $10 worth of Real Time Pain Relief. You get a free $10 tube of Real Time Pain Relief. Rub it on. The pain is gone in real time. I'm Gary Digit Williams. Thanks so much for joining us. And always remember to keep supporting the best boxing in the world, the boxing along the Beltway. Thanks for listening. Take care.